right, so what is an async function? Well, it's a way of doing what a promise does, but doing it better. It's a function that sends out a call now for something later, and you want to wait instead of moving on right now. It's like ordering a package from Amazon and it's going to be delivered sometime in the future. When exactly, you don't know. You want to do other stuff outside the house, but you want to be there when the package arrives. Do you stay or do you go? Well, you choose to stay and wait. This is what async and await do. They pause your code, specifically the scope in which their call gets paused, and the code waits until it gets the package. All right, so let's build that async function. So I'm going to build a function here. This is not the async function, but we need some sort of function that takes time to respond back to us. So we're just going to build an alarm bell, which has a delay, and it's going to return a new promise. If you don't know what a promise is, I'll have a link in the description below. So we'll take the resolve object of the promise, and we'll set the delay using a set timeout. So again, just an artificial delay. Set timeout takes two arguments. The first one is the callback, the function that we want to run. And the second argument is the time we want to wait. So we're going to wait 5,000 milliseconds, which is 5 seconds. In 5 seconds, we're going to resolve with ding, 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 like that. So all this function does is, let me show you on the right here. You call the alarm bell, console log the response, and we get promise pending, and we wait 5 seconds, and we get the ding, ding, ding. That's all it does. Now let's build the actual async function. So a function will say set alarm, like that. And all it's going to do is three things. Log me out the, let's just say setting alarm. And then we're going to call the alarm, so alarm bell like that. And then we're just going to log out the response from the alarm bell, which we have to capture. So let's say let response equal alarm bell. Now let's see what we get when we set this alarm. Notice we didn't async this function yet. So without the async, what this function does is the first line is setting alarm. The second line is executing the alarm bell and equating the alarm bell's return to the response and then logging out that response. This is what the response is right now. Promise pending. So it hasn't been resolved. The 5-second timer at the time of logging out this console response hasn't activated. So in order to wait for it to activate and then log out the response, we need to async this guy up. So async function, so async keyword, then your function, and then await. So we're going to wait for the alarm bell to resolve, and then we're going to go to line 13. So now when we run the function, we get the desired behavior, which is setting alarm, promise pending, and we're waiting, and there we go, ding, ding, ding. So that's literally it. It's a lot more intuitive than promises. Promises, the bitcoin. Let's convert this guy quickly into a promise. Let me show you. So if we didn't have a promise, let me just save this guy so you guys can see. So async and await are just more comfortable, smooth, cleaner ways of doing promises. So let's convert this guy. We'll just copy this function here. So we don't need the async keyword. And we don't need the await keyword. And so this alarm bell is going to return a promise. It's not the resolved promise, it's the promise. And so we can do something like this. Instead of logging out the response, which again would just give us this promise here pending. What we want is the stuff inside the promise. So we have to, again, if you don't know what promise is, I'll link a video in the description, or I'll put it as a card. We have to handle the response, handle the resolve properly. So response.then, and this res right here, it's the resolved object. You don't need to call it res. You can call it that if you wanted to. We'll say res, and then we'll console.log that response. And again, this is just the way of converting your async to a promise. I just wanted to show you guys the syntactic difference. So now when we set the alarm, and notice we don't have an async function, we don't have a wait, we're just using promises in this one. Set alarm, we get, spell it properly, setting alarm. Now we wait 5 seconds, and we get the ding, ding, ding. So as you can see, it's just a async and await, just more intuitive to how people think, where I want to go line by line. I want to set alarm. I want to let the response. Oh, what's that? I want to wait for the alarm bell, and then I want to continue to 13. With this promise stuff, you have to set like a callback function. It's just it's less intuitive. And so where would we use this async stuff in the real world? Well, you use it exactly where you use a promise. Let's say you're pinging a server for some data, and the next lines in your code, they they rely on the fact that the data has to be sent back before it moves on. So let me just show you. So all we're going to do is we're going to fetch some dummy data from a site. I think it's called HTTP. Let's see if I have it in my history. Yeah, there we go. So this is HTTP JSON holder business. It just sends dummy data back to you so you can test out whether your fetches, your get, your post requests are working. And so it just sends back this data here. And let me parse that so you can see what the actual data looks like. Console.log.res, and we'll do a .then, and we'll say r console.log.res. Excuse me, r. And then we do this. Did it? Oh wait, the first one has to be a parse. I didn't parse the data properly. So res.json like that. Make some space. So this is the data it sends back. Again, dummy data, just frivolous nonsense. User ID 1, ID 1, and title delectus, odem, I don't know, whatever. And so let's build a function, an async function that expects this data to be returned before it uses it in the code. So let's say this function says, how about show data? Function show data, and we'll say console.log fetching data, and then we'll do the actual fetch. I'll just copy this guy here. Fetch like that. But instead of logging it to the console, what we're going to do is just return the parsed data. And then what are we going to do here? Let's say response is equal to that. So this response is not going to be a promise. If I just said let response equal fetch, then it would be promise. But since I resolved it in this this then statement here, sorry for the jankiness. Since I resolved it in this statement here, that response is going to be equal to this stuff here, this object. So let's console log that response out. So all this show data function is going to do, it's just going to say fetching data. It's going to fetch the data. It's going to get it in the response, and it's going to print that data out in the response. Let's see what we get. Show data. We get fetching data. We execute the fetch, and it console logs the response. Line 26. Line 26 is the promise. And why is it the promise? Because we didn't async and await the actual fetch. So it's printing out, it's going to line 26 before line 25 has a chance to actually resolve. So again, we just async that guy up, async, and we want to wait for the fetch. So we say await, and now we save, and now when we run the function, we get fetching data, and there we go, line 26. This is our data here. And again, this is just a real world example of how you use async and await. Let's say we just, like this is kind of banal, right? It's like we're just printing out the response. Let's say this line 26 actually hindered on getting the response from fetch. Let's say my ID, actually my user ID is, and then we'll say, what was it? Response.user ID. And we'll say my ID is, and we'll say this one is ID, and we'll say my title is response.id. Now again, these 3 lines of code, they expect the fetch data to come back before executing. What if they don't? Well, you get this result here. Say show data. My user ID is undefined, undefined, undefined. So that's why we need to properly async and await the response. And we show data, and we get my user ID is 1, and delect is odem. So again, that's just a real world example of how we use an async and await combination. And so that's what async and await are. It's just a cleaner version of promises. If you don't know what promise is, you should really know that before you dive into async await. Again, it's just a cleaner, more condensed, more intuitive version of a promise. And so it's a way of waiting for a response from a piece of code that takes time to respond. And so this async await business, it quote unquote pauses your code kind of, so you can plan for the eventual response. Be careful where you use this one, guys. If this video helped you at all, give a like, thumbs up, comments down below. Subscribe if you haven't already subscribed, and I'll see you guys in the next video.